All right, folks, so despite the fact that Al Gore told us that the polar ice caps would melt by 2013 and we would all be underwater, that's just not the case. And as we've heard, much of Texas actually looks more like the polar ice caps than it does the Lone Star State. So here's what actually happened that attributed to this crisis. Long story short, Texas got shellacked by this winter storm. Millions of folks without power, without water for days. Obviously, the storm was a rare occurrence, but why was this so catastrophic? Well, as for water, it goes without saying. In a state bordering Mexico, they don't heavily insulate their pipes. Why would they? So the temperatures got down around zero. Water expands. When it freezes, pow, broken pipes, no more water. But the electrical grid is much more complicated. It's another story. Now, without going into the ridiculousness of green energy politics, Texas consumes about 30 to 35,000 megawatts an hour, as you can see here from this chart. Almost 1/3 of that is from wind and solar. This has been on the rise because government subsidies started under Bush 43, which made it competitive in a place that pumps out nearly 30% of the nation's oil. But why? Your guess is as good as mine, but whatevs. So the supply and demand. Weather got cold, demand for energy rose. Normally, that's not a problem. But in this case, natural gas plants, which provide the majority of energy to Texas, which gets their gas largely through pipelines, could not receive enough gas to compensate for the surge on the grid while combating freezing lines. They didn't run out of gas, folks. It's Texas. But they could not draw it fast enough. You see, when gas is expelled under pressure from the end of a pipe, it creates a chilling effect. Now, you combine that with the uninsulated pipes in 0-degree weather, it's not good. Next, the icy weather cut wind and solar power production to about 15% capacity. Now, these energy forms are notoriously worthless in severe weather, so, cheers to the Green New Deal, AOC. They didn't even produce enough power to de-ice themselves. Also, because of the cold, the batteries were only operating at a less than 50% capacity, rendering this fairly useless. Now, nuclear, it only produces about 10% of Texas's grid, it was heavily needed at this time, but while normally unaffected by weather, it does require a massive amount of water to operate. Again, being America's southernmost state, there was little insulation on these water pipes. So alarms went off in the plant, potentially freezing. Safety protocol shut down the reactor. As a precaution, nothing was actually wrong, so we got zero power from the nukes. And lastly, the only fully functional, non-affected plants were really the coal plants. One problem. Due to the recent subsidies and the eco-push, these plants have largely begun to have been phased out. They're currently producing less energy than the wind turbines in the state. There simply wasn't enough capacity available to give the overwhelming amount of energy we needed to power the grid. So now, despite all the news media talking points on both sides, now you know what really happened.